10 apocalypses that we survived. Number 10. The Black Death. The Black Death is probably the most famous plague ever to hit humanity, but most people don't realise it's taken a huge chunk out of the world's population on more than one occasion. Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the bubonic plague, had its first breakout appearance in 541 CE. Known as the Plague of Justinian, the disease swept through the Byzantine Empire, killing 5,000 people a day for over a year. Eventually, around 50 million people died, 25% of the world's population at the time. Empire, killing 5,000 people a day for over a year. Eventually, around 50 million people died, 25% of the world's population at the time. Then in 1346, the plague re-emerged as the Black Death. Giant swellings appeared on victims' bodies as they fell into fevers and started throwing up blood. Oh, and they died. Anywhere from 75 million to 200 million people were killed by the Black Death, but I guess no one was massively worried about keeping exact records when all their friends were busy vomiting up blood. Roughly 60% of Europe's population disappeared, and the world population didn't reach pre-plague levels until 250 years later. There was even a third plague outbreak in China in 1855, taking another 10 million people out. Yet humanity survived all of it. Or at least, we have so far. Technically, the plague still exists. Number 9. The Ice Age. Nowadays, it only has to dip below room temperature to send most of us reaching for a Snuggie. So it's pretty incredible that humans managed to survive through the Ice Age. Yet that's exactly what scientists now know happened, at least according to research from a journal so scientifically sciencey they called it Science. The paper dates recently discovered human fossils as 37,000 years old, meaning mankind managed to tough its way through the Ice Age, which is pretty impressive considering that the Ice Age was basically 30,000 years of Mother Nature trying to freeze us off the Earth. With temperatures dipping around the world and plants dying, life suddenly became much harder. Every subspecies of human except Homo sapiens, that's us, and Neanderthals, a dumber version of us, died out. Some scientists think that we only made it through the freezing era because a few hundred of us happened to find a small warm region 200 odd miles east of modern-day Cape Town. Those lucky few are thought to be the only humans who survived the Ice Age. Yet ice literally whittled our entire species down to a few hundred people. Fortunately, our ancestors just about managed to survive sitting through the Ice Age, although to this day there is no proof that any human has ever survived sitting all the way through Ice Age 2 to 5. Number 8. 2012 Solar Flare. In 1859, the Earth was struck with a massive solar storm. While everyone was messing about doing Victorian-y things like trying on corsets and growing amazing mustaches, a bizarre white light appeared over Australia. Although two astronomers, Richard Carrington and Richard Hodgson, spotted the event, there was no effect to society as a whole. But that wouldn't have been the case had it happened today. You see, the solar flare that struck the Earth would have interfered with our modern power grid, crippling it and forcing us to live without power. That means no artificial light, no internet for information, no communication more advanced than shouting, and worst of all, no more selfies. The scary thing is this almost happened in 2012. In that year, there was a massive solar storm that just missed the Earth. And I mean just. If the storm had started 6 minutes earlier, our planet would have been hit, and according to NASA, we'd still be picking up the pieces. Number 7. Tunguska Event. When not trying to kill us with solar flares, space has a simpler, if less elegant solution. The Smithsonian exhibit was far from a one-off. In 1908, a meteorite rocketed into our atmosphere and started plummeting to the ground. It landed at Tunguska in the middle of Siberia, which is just another way of saying the middle of nowhere. It's lucky the meteorite landed where it did. The impact was 1,000 tons. Considering the damage one A-bomb did to Hiroshima or Nagasaki, something with 1,000 times the power would have wiped out even the largest city. Had the meteorite's path differed slightly, the comet could have hit Moscow, turning the city to dust and dramatically changing the course of history. Number 6. Population collapse. A million years ago, humanity came to the brink of extinction, and the scariest thing, we don't even know how it happened. Scientists researching Neolithic man have found that our population suddenly and mysteriously bottlenecked. In other words, the number of humans plummeted, some think to as low as 18,000. That's low enough to make human beings an endangered species. There are a number of theories as to how this happened, but the two most prominent theories are these. Either A, we suffered from some mass extinction event like a giant earthquake or a volcanic eruption, or B, we became overpopulated in one region and killed off our food supply there. Whatever happened, it was enough to have a long-term impact on the population. Fossil evidence suggests that the number of humans stayed around 18,000 for tens of thousands of years. With a headcount so low, humans were a long-term impact on the population. Fossil evidence suggests that the number of humans stayed around 18,000 for tens of thousands of years. With a headcount so low, humans were extremely vulnerable, and another cataclysmic event could easily put an end to our species, permanently. Number 5. Shanxi earthquake. That happened once. In 1556, Shanxi province in northern China was hit with an earthquake in 2010. The impact of this China-shaking event was massive. 830,000 people died. That may not sound like a lot compared with the Black Death or the Ice Age, but actually it was a whopping 60% of the population of central China. That's the equivalent of an earthquake killing 780 million people nowadays. The cost of the damage is impossible to measure, but it almost caused the Chinese government and economy to collapse. A similar collapse today would bring the world economy to its knees, sparking chaos and destruction around the world. Number 4. Permian clung on and outlived it all. But humans almost didn't get the chance to be plucky little survivors. In fact, we were almost wiped out long before we even existed. Way back in 250 million BC, many experts agree 50 million BCE, when we were still handsome little rat things, there was a mass extinction event that almost ended life on Earth. Though there's disagreement as to what exactly happened, many experts agree that the formation of the massive continent Pangaea blocked the oceans around it from flowing properly. This led to the water becoming stagnated and deadly. Bad news if you're a little rat thing. The stagnant water poisoned almost everything in it, killing 96% of all marine life. But it didn't stop there. Not having a reliable source of clean water also proved fatal to 70% of land-based species. The Permian Triassic extinction was so devastating to the Earth that NASA refers to it as the Great Dying. Fortunately, we've already seen what the bubonic plague could do watching YouTube videos. Number 3. Spanish flu. We've already seen what the bubonic plague could do when let loose on medicine and disease prevention seems almost impossible, yet that's exactly what Spanish flu achieved. In 1918, Spanish flu spread rapidly around the world, infecting 250 million people. The disease turned having a strong immune system into a lungs, causing people to drown in their own fluids. Basically, the disease tricked your body into doing the equivalent of trying to remove facial acne with a shotgun. The disease disappeared by the end of the year, probably mutating into a less deadly strain of flu, but in the short time it had killed 50 million people. A re-emergence of the Spanish flu remains Bill Gates' biggest fear for the future. In fact, he rates the odds of it happening within his lifetime perished in the conflict, and 50 million civilians were murdered. Add in the victims of the Holocaust and that brings the total to You don't need us to tell you that World War II that brings the total to a staggering 85 million deaths. But the war was almost even more deadly than that. We now know that Hitler had his Nazi scientists working around the bomb and that he already had developed a nuclear weapon. From 1939 onwards, the German nuclear program grew even closer to successfully splitting the atom. Some even claimed that they were on the verge of completing an atomic bomb, and that he already had plans drawn up to nuke London and New York. In a gratifying display of karma, the fact the Nazis were never quite able to rain nuclear hell down on us was in large part due to their own bigotry. All the prominent Jewish physicists in the country had been killed off or fired, leaving the Nazis without many of the leading experts they could have relied on. Number 1. Toba supervolcano. When you hear the term supervolcano, you know things are about to get real, and the Toba supervolcano is no exception. As devastating as all the other events on this list have been, this was the closest mankind ever came to extinction. In 70,000 BCE, while humans were still learning which end of the spear to use, the Toba supervolcano suddenly exploded, and we mean exploded. Experts at the real and epically named Volcanic Explosivity Index describe the eruption as mega-colossal. Yet this thing was so big it caused scientists to make up a word just to convey its awesomeness. The heat and power of the eruption vaporized 2,800 kilometers of surrounding rock, sending it all into the atmosphere. For comparison, the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980 only managed to destroy 1 kilometer of rock. As you might imagine, 2,800 kilometers of rock dust being blasted into the sky isn't great for the environment. The dust blackened out most of the sun's light for 6 years. With little plant life and increasingly sparse prey, most people starved. The global population dropped to around 3,000, and the number of breeding adults left may have fallen as low as 80. Yes, if 80 people hadn't screwed, we wouldn't be here today. Most people starved. The global population dropped to around 3,000, most of the sun's light for 6 years. With little plant life and increasingly sparse prey, most people starved. The global population dropped to around 3,000, and the number of breeding adults left may have fallen as low as 80. Yes, if 80 people hadn't screwed, we wouldn't be here today. That's pretty scary, but there is good news. The fact that only the smartest and most resourceful humans managed to survive probably made us a better species in the long run. So those were 10 apocalypses